The identity verification block is the other side of the B2B software identity coin. If the products in the auth block that we spoke about in the previous video are about how to let users log in and after that to manage their accounts, the products in the verification block enables businesses to verify and validate the identity of their users when they log in or when they conduct a transaction. And similarly to what we did for the auth block, we divided the ID verification block into a stack of 2 layers. In the application layer, you'll find the products that enable businesses to verify the identity of their users out of the box, often with turnkey solutions. Some well-known companies in this layer are Onfido or IDnow. Then you have the API/middleware/DevTools layer, which groups all the tools that enable developers to create their own ID verification processes or the tools which are specialized on specific tasks. What was super interesting to see when we explored this space is how fast this market is actually growing and changing. The need for identity verification is literally exploding. The first obvious reason is the explosion of online transactions that require an identity check. The COVID crisis has greatly accelerated the volume of transactions happening online, and an increasing number of them require a minimum of identity verification. Historically, many of the ID verification providers were built for financial services, whether it's a bank or other payments provider. The majority of financial services require an ID proof before you can conduct a financial transaction, and they do that in order to avoid theft and other money laundering problems. But what is happening is that this need is now felt in many more categories that go beyond financial services. For example, more and more gaming companies need to control who access their services. Same with peer-to-peer marketplaces, gig economy platforms, social media apps, many crypto platforms as well, health product providers, consumer subscription business, etc., etc. The list goes on. This explosion in terms of use cases is followed by an increasing pressure from the legal side. Many governments are rolling out new legislations that forces businesses to have more control over who access their service. As a telling sign of the growing importance of online identity, the European Commission proposed a framework for a European digital identity which will be available to all EU citizens, residents and businesses in the EU. Citizens will be able to prove their identity and share electronic documents from their European digital identity wallets with the click of a button on their phone. Finally, similarly to what is happening on the authentication space, hackers and other bad-intended entities are coming with increasingly sophisticated attacks to steal and fake identities. So the verification providers are in a never-ending race to improve their products to answer these new threats. So for all these reasons, you understand why the identity verification space is currently changing very fast, and a lot of exciting new stuff is emerging. Now let's briefly cover the 2 layers of our ID verification stack, starting with the application layer. In this layer, you'll find the products that enable businesses to directly verify the identity of their users out of the box. Identifying and verifying users is actually a very complex process that can take many forms depending on the particular use case. I think that most of you have already uploaded a picture of your ID cards in order to use a banking mobile app or to initiate a transfer on a website such as Wise, for example. If it's probably the third thing that comes to mind when we speak about ID verification, what is interesting to notice is that the ways to identify users are actually growing. First, when it comes to actively verifying your identity, you can obviously use government-issued documents. But other types of documents are now used, such as uploading a selfie, recording and uploading a video of yourself, or even using biometrics to confirm who you are. The way to actively confirm your identity keeps growing. Far from all services ask you to actively confirm your identity, but many of them will do it in the background without you knowing it. For example, simply based on an email address or a credit card number, they can run quite a long list of verifications thanks to identification databases. Sometimes this verification even happens based on product usage, without any personal information as an input. For instance, some social media platforms are not allowed to let children under 13 years old to create an account. And in order to catch the ones who lie about their age during the sign-up, they have put in place pattern recognition algorithm based on product usage that detect when users are potentially younger than what they declared. As you can see, ID verification is not only about confirming a particular identity, but also to detect specific demographics. In the infrastructure layer, you'll find the services that enable developers to create their own ID verification process and orchestration services. As we saw, there's a growing number of ways to confirm the identity of a user. As a consequence, there's an increasing number of pick and shovel startups that provide the technology to do that. For example, ID R&D is a technology company specialized in biometric authentication with facial and voice recognition, or Microblink for documents. But you also have in this group data provider companies that provide, for example, publicly available criminal records. Since the ID verification stack is increasingly fragmented, there's a growing need for orchestration services that enables businesses to connect the different ID verification services that they use and consolidate ID verification across different products or channels. The explosion of use cases for ID verification is creating a need for more flexible products and personalized experiences. A marketplace in the gig economy might not have exactly the same needs compared to a company in the finance space or a gaming company. To answer these needs, we see a growing trend of specialized players emerging in the space. This specialization can be a focus on specific industries, use cases, or even in some geographics, as legal requirements can be quite different from one country to the other. The big question is whether in a space already dominated by huge players such as Onfido or ID Now, there's still space for other large companies, or if these new players will stay niche. My personal belief is that there's such an explosion in terms of needs that the market is getting far deeper than before. And as a consequence, these verticalized ID verification providers can become huge companies. I might be wrong, but it's my opinion at the moment. The market is definitely getting deeper and deeper. Another consequence of the broadening of the identity verification market is that the products in that space must appeal to a broader audience. Historically, since most ID verification providers were selling their tools to large companies in the financial industry, the products were often enterprise type of products, meaning that they needed a lot of resources to be set up and used. What we see currently emerging is a new breed of products which are targeting developers directly and with a much more modern approach based on simplicity and ease of use. You don't need a team of 10 engineers and months of setup before you can use these new products. The sales motion is expanding to a more bottom-up approach where developers can test themselves a solution before committing to buying it. In that perspective, we saw an increasing number of low-code and no-code ID verification products that provide both flexibility and personalizations. In our API/developer tool layer, what stood out was also the rise of pick and shovel startups. As we explained, the race between hackers and businesses is a never-ending race, with hackers coming with more and more sophisticated attacks to steal and fake identities. This is why we constantly need new ways to verify the identity of users, and these tasks become increasingly complex from a technical point of view. As a consequence, a growing number of startups focus on providing this technology and offer pick and shovels to the identity verification industry. Coming back to the application layer and the explosion of use cases, one of the challenges for the incumbents is to stay relevant. The customers and the use cases are now so diverse that the major players cannot keep up with this demand in terms of product, and they risk being unbundled by the smaller but more specialized newcomers. To answer this challenge, many of them know that they won't be able to compete on the pure product aspect. So the big question is how they can become platforms and become the identity hub where their customers will consume other ID products. Think of how Salesforce transitioned from a pure CRM to now a real platform for businesses. This is why orchestration is becoming key as the identity verification stack is becoming increasingly fragmented. The last trend I'll cover is about the business model and the commoditization of identity verification. The pricing structure of most incumbents is quite complex, but a key element in that space is that a big chunk of the pricing relies on the volume of verifications you process. The more you verify the identity of users, the more you pay. But since there's more and more players providing these services, there's a growing competition around pricing, and newcomers are super aggressive with the way they price their service. This race toward the commoditization of ID verification has many impacts, whether it's in terms of pricing, unit economics, and even the extra features which are now monetized.